Now let me ask Dr. Yamini Aiyar to kick off today's session with her opening address. But before she comes, a quick introduction about Dr. Yamini Aiyar. Most of you would know, she is one of the finest minds in the country today on the subject that we have chosen to discuss. She was leading the Center for Policy Research, which is in one of India's most premier think tanks, for more than a decade. At a very young age, she took charge of that organization. She built it up. It's the most premier organization. It used to be the most premier organization in public policy research. They branched into a lot of areas. She took CPR to a new height. They also had a big project on capacity building going on with the Odisha state government. Am I right, Yamini? Yeah. And now she, under various circumstances, she had to step down as the president of Center for Policy Research, subsequent to which she has been a visiting fellow at the Brown University in the United States. And it was very kind of her. She is here on a break. And one fine morning, I called her and I said, Yamini, this is the event we are going to have. And since you are in India, can you take a day out? And she readily agreed. So I'm thankful to her. And I can assure you, and I'm not going to assure you, I'm pretty sure that you're going to love what you're going to hear from her. Yamini.
Thank you so much, Rajesh. It is such an honor for me to be over here in Bhubaneswar after a very, very good Uriya meal to come and speak to you. So I think, I don't know what you will get out of me, but I have certainly had a very wonderful opportunity to come back to Bhubaneswar after 3-4 years, have a really good meal, a really good conversation, and I know I'm going to learn a lot from all of you over the next few hours. It's a real privilege to be here at the Odisha Dialogues. I have spoken once before at the Odisha Dialogues some years ago, but that was on Zoom. Rajesh didn't give me the privilege of coming to Bhubaneswar. He just said, "Kaam karo, Zoom pe karo." तो दिल्ली की गंदी हवा सांस लेके हम दिल्ली में ही बात कर रहे थे. So I'm really honored that he invited me to speak on a subject that is both very personal to me and I think is at the heart of the political question that India confronts. So I thought I would talk to you to make the following case. First, to argue for why federalism is at the heart of Indian democracy. And if federalism breaks, Indian democracy becomes weak. I want to first make that case. I then want to talk a little bit about why federalism is under significant threat, both in the political realm, in the economic realm, and in the administrative realm, and all three come together. And last, I want to bring our attention to what I think actually is the most important part of the federal question, about which we talk very little, which is the third tier of our governance, which is the tier of our governance that matters most to people and should be at the heart of any political project to revive and strengthen federalism and through that strengthen Indian democracy. So I hope that through my brief intervention for the next 15-20 minutes, I can convince you all that there is a political project that we can construct on this idea of federalism, and it is one that will strengthen and deepen Indian democracy in many, many ways. Why does federalism matter? Let me tell you just a brief digression to tell you a little bit about myself, who I am. I'm a half Punjabi. My mother is from Amritsar. I'm a half Tamilian. My father is from Tanjore. I'm married to a Malayali from Trivandrum, and I live in Delhi. And so in my house, very often I can hear Punjabi, I can hear Tamil, I can hear Malayalam, and because we live in Delhi, I hear a lot of Hindi, and we also speak in English. All these three different parts of me come together in a very comprehensive idea of who I am, which is an Indian. I cannot be an Indian if I am not thoda thoda sa Punjabi, kunjum sa Tamil. I don't quite know what the Mallus say because my husband hasn't taught me any Malayalam. I think he thinks it's better that he can complain about me in Malayalam, so I don't understand. So, kunjum Malayalam, kunjum Tamil. And basically, all of that together makes me an Indian. What is so special and significant about Indian federalism is that it is the glue that allows all of us as Indians to be a version of me. Odia, an Indian. Tamil, an Indian. Malayali, an Indian. Punjabi, an Indian. In many ways, during our freedom movement, it was precisely this idea that was at the heart of the political project of what the modern nation state would be after the British went home. The idea that we can be a nation with multiple languages, multiple cultures, multiple types of food. We can have tandoori chicken and march at the same time and feel excited about what that means for us as a country. We can have multiple religions all cohere together in this idea of India. This was very unique because there are almost no democracies in the world that are able to hold together so many different identities into the identity of a nation state. If you think about the European project, for centuries, the Europeans went to war with one another and eventually created borders into countries that were homogeneous. One language, one nation, one culture, one nation, one food, one nation, one religion, one nation. And the beauty of India is that we rejected that idea because we believed we could be many different things and one nation. And the only way for democracy to survive was to be able to create a structure within our constitution that allowed us to be all of these things in a democracy. In 1950, when we adopted our constitution and we committed to becoming an electoral democracy where the last Indian, regardless of caste, regardless of literacy, regardless of income, had the power to vote, most in the Western world that had had some experience with democracy looked at India and said, not possible. Too much variety, too much poverty, it will not hold together. It will look like what Eastern Europe or the USSR in Eastern Europe looks like today. That was the general consensus. But our founding fathers chose to take a leap of faith because they believed that there was power to multiple ideas within this idea of a singular nation state. And to maintain those multiple identities, it was very important to develop a structure of governance, a structure of federalism with a union and many states that allowed for all these identities to cohere together. So Indian federalism in a lot of the scholarly literature on federalism is considered to be very unique. It is called a holding together federalism. A federalism where the nation state, the idea of the nation state, the union government, holds together these different identities, but it holds it together with considerable degrees of freedom so that our political identities that are linked to our ethnic identities, our cultural identities, our linguistic identities, our religious identities can find space within this. The structure of our federalism was therefore quite unique. It created for a very strong union government. So we have a very unique federalism if you compare it with any other nation that considers itself federal, where the union government has the power to redraw boundaries of states. In a sense, Indian federalism is not about protecting the territorial integrity of a state as such. Of course, borders matter. It is about protecting the political identity within the construct of a state, which is why the union government has from time to time redrawn boundaries. The most important one was done in the 1950s, where we redrew the boundaries into the State Reorganization Act according to our linguistic and cultural identities. So we can be Odia, we can speak Odia, and we are Indian within that construct. That was what federalism allowed us to be. And it is that idea that today I think is under very deep threat, because we are abandoning this political notion of democratic accommodation. Instead, we are abandoning the idea that there can be many languages, many cultures, many identities, and one nation, to move towards an idea where there can be one nation, one language, one nation, one identity, one nation, one religion, and all others who don't sit within this oneness must consent to being second-class citizens. This is the idea that we have to challenge, because if India is not allowed to be as diverse, as many as India truly is, we will no longer be the unique democratic experiment that defied so much of how the rest of the world looked and thought and understood about democracy. We are unique because we are many and we are one. We are unique because we are many and we are one, and we are democratic. In fact, we cannot be unique, many, and one if we are not a democracy. So for me, federalism and democracy sit very closely together. And if we want to preserve our democracy, which has been hard won and hard consolidated, then we also have to ensure that we preserve our federalism and hold it dear and closely to us, so that we can remain many and not be boxed in to becoming that singular one. So that's why federalism matters. But in our everyday, in our administration, in our economy, and how we experience the state and how we experience our everyday lives, federalism plays a very, very important role. The way the Indian Constitution is designed, it has what many call a one-third, two-third problem. In that, the union government has very strong powers to collect revenue. But it is for the state governments that the Constitution assigns a lot of the expenditure assignment. It does so for two reasons. One, because we are a very diverse country, not just in our multiplicities of identities, but also in our histories, and therefore also in our economies. If you are born in Tamil Nadu, or if you are born in Kerala, you are likely to be born in a lot greater wealth and in a more productive economy than if you are born in Odisha or Bihar. And the challenge for the Indian Union is, how do you ensure equity so that regardless of whether as a citizen of India you are born in Bihar or born in Kerala, we all have access to a certain minimum standard of public services, because we also expect our government to deliver on some basic public goods, roads, health, education, basic social safety nets, basic welfare, so that all of us as Indians have equal chance to enhance our capabilities and to participate in our economies at the same level. Now, of course, this meant that you cannot punish Bihar for being a poorer state or less productive state compared to Kerala or Tamil Nadu for that matter, or Maharashtra for that matter. It needs support to be able to develop. So the principle of equity, that the union government would perhaps collect the bulk of taxes, but then redistribute it equally on the basis of a principle of equity across states, so that Bihar and Kerala could ensure that they offered their citizens, all citizens of India, equal services at equal levels. This is why we created in the Constitution the Finance Commission, whose principal function was to ensure that on the basis of a formulae, the equity principle at the heart of it, that taxes collected by the union government would then be distributed across the country to ensure minimum standards of public services to all citizens. But there was also this recognition that developmental needs in different parts of the country were varied, and perhaps Bihar or Odisha need a little bit more support to build their roads, to strengthen their schools, to improve to build their industry, compared to a slightly more historically, economically better off state, such as perhaps Kerala or Tamil Nadu. And so in the 1950s, we created this other idea of a planning commission that sat together with the Finance Commission to determine this equitable distribution of resources and to build the economy across the country. Over time, both these institutions, but more particularly the Planning Commission, became less and less about equity and distribution and a lot more about centralization of economic resources. And that has always been a tension in the way the federal structure in India, particularly the economic structure, the fiscal federal structure has been designed, where there are tools that the central government has that it can use in ways that often try to then command what states are doing. This is often converted into what we call the centrally sponsored schemes, which are Government of India formulated schemes where Government of India puts a certain amount of money. States are supposed to give their share to implement programs at the state level. Now, the idea behind the centrally sponsored schemes was somewhat similar to the equity principle in the sense that there are some things that we must ensure all Indian citizens have: education, basic health, basic social safety nets, PDS, Narega, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, what is now Samagra Shiksha, National Health Mission, all became designed as centrally sponsored schemes. The idea was that this would provide resources, money, financial resources to states. States would contribute their share to implement these programs that would generally work for the betterment of all Indians. But the minute you create tools, and power is a strange thing, you all are as politicians, know much more about power than I do, but money is power, and power means you want control. So these instruments of fiscal decentralization, like centrally sponsored schemes, have often been used as a way to control money and in some ways to tell states what to do. But a state knows its own trajectory, its own developmental needs much better than anyone sitting in New Delhi. And frankly, a village knows its trajectory, its developmental needs, and how best to direct its own money towards its own betterment much better than anybody sitting in a state capital. And the biggest challenge that India has always faced with its fiscal federal structure is that it has always been tempted to become too centralized and to tell lower levels of government, different levels of government, what to do, because it wants to control power at the center. In recent years, this problem has become much worse. Even though the Finance Commission, since the time of the 14th Finance Commission in 2015, pushed for a greater devolution of taxes to states from 32% to 42%. In the 15th Finance Commission, it went to 41. It stayed at about 41%. That 1% difference was on account of Jammu Kashmir and Ladakh becoming a union territory. But when Government of India is asked to devolve more, the urge to hold on to money remains quite strong. And what Government of India has consistently been doing in the last decade is to use other provisions in the Constitution like cess and excise duty to reduce the amount of funds available in the devolution pool for states. And so even though the Finance Commission says that 41% or 42% of devolved funds should reach states, on average, since 2015, this has stayed in the range of 32%. And centrally sponsored schemes that used to operate on a sometimes 90-10, otherwise 65-25-35 ratio, became schemes that were to be shared at a 60-40 ratio. So states had to put in 40% from their own resources into the total pool of monies for centrally sponsored schemes, thereby squeezing states of all their money. Now, politically, this can be really useful because central government then has more money to implement its schemes. Many times, the schemes it designs are drawn from experiences in the state. Kalia is a really good example of how a scheme in Odisha became a national scheme, became the basis for crafting the PM Kisan. And when the Government of India is delivering these schemes, politically, it is much easier to say, ye Pradhan Mantri ke scheme hai, regardless of whether the state government has been implementing or not. So credit attribution goes to Delhi, and skips Bhubaneswar, whereas implementation has to happen in Bhubaneswar. So Bhubaneswar loses out. More importantly, Bhubaneswar may feel, given that it best understands what it needs to do for its state, that instead of implementing a certain type of central scheme, it wants to use its money for something else that matters most for Bhubaneswar. But those resources get squeezed. In 2017, when we adopted the GST, the space for state governments to determine taxation rates was reduced. That was the grand bargain, reducing fiscal autonomy in the hope that a national goods and services tax would enhance overall economic growth. But this too has become an instrument of centralization and has become a point of great friction between center and states. And finally, the idea of double engine, that when the center and the state come together in the form of the same government, of the same political party, you get efficiency. So the idea that diversity of experience, what state needs might be different to what the union government imagines that the state needs, gets abandoned in this idea that double-engine sarkar is good for development, and so we can centralize resources further, and New Delhi will decide what Bhubaneswar needs, or what Chennai needs, or what Patna needs. None of those are conducive to development. The absence of the removal of the Planning Commission and the creation of the Niti Aayog too has added to the problem. Not that the Planning Commission was doing great things, it too was an instrument of centralization, and chief ministers would have to go to Delhi to get their plans approved very often. But the idea that there is a central structure, a space for dialogue and deliberation with states to determine how resources should be shared outside of the Finance Commission devolution formula, was an extremely important political space for dialogue, for negotiation, for consensus, which is at the heart of what prevents centralization and enables deeper federalism. In the absence of the Planning Commission and the National Development Council, where chief ministers used to come, we have now lost that political platform. And in that institutional vacuum, finance ministries at the center are making decisions about how allocations between departments should work and what should go to different states in terms of allocations for schemes. Finance ministries by design are about tightening money, not giving out money, and often state governments don't quite know where to go to bargain, to dialogue, to deliberate, and to arrive at a national consensus of how much it is that the union government should be spending in collaboration with states on the challenge of education, on the challenge of health, on the challenge of social safety nets, Narega, cash transfers, whatever schemes that are so essential to all of India. In the absence of these institutional mechanisms, we don't have the spaces for dialogue and deliberation that are necessary to ensure that when we spend to the needs of places and not the imagined idea that a double engine knows best how all of India must develop and what path it must take. I've spent a lot of time talking about the problems of centralization of the union government, but I cannot walk away without reminding all of us sitting at the state government level too, that much as we should be concerned about what happens between center and state, we also need to remember that state governments have not done very well when it comes to power sharing and resource sharing with local governments. Panchayats and municipalities, I must add that Odisha does a little bit better than many other states, but there's a lot more that can be done. Panchayats and municipalities lose out significantly on overall government expenditure because it stays very much in the hands of the state governments. They have if you compare to other large countries, China and the United States, the lowest percentage of public expenditure, it takes place in India by local governments. It's less than 2% compared to 7 to 15% in other countries. The lowest capacity to raise revenue because we do not devolve powers to local governments. If we do not strengthen panchayats and municipalities, we are not doing development in ways that genuinely respond to the realities on the ground. आप सब ये जानते हैं, हम यहाँ पे बैठ के तय नहीं कर सकते कि किसी गांव में किसी वहाँ के विकास की ज़रूरतें किस तरह की होती हैं. And when we don't do that, we come up with all kinds of strange things. I was once some years ago in Purnia, in eastern Bihar, trying to find a school that said it had bought some fire safety equipment, but we couldn't find the school. We were tracking funding of education funds. At the time, it was Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan at the time. We were trying to understand how our Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan money spent in a rural school in Bihar, to understand whether this money is spent in ways that are useful to the school. पैसा आता है तो खर्चा कौन करता है, और जब वो उन पैसों का खर्चा होता है, क्या उनका खर्चा लोगों के ज़रूरतें या विकास की ज़रूरतों के हिसाब से होता है या किसी और की सोच के हिसाब से होता था. ये हमारा छोटा सा सवाल था. हमें 2 दिन लगे उस स्कूल को ढूंढने में, क्योंकि उस स्कूल का कोई बिल्डिंग नहीं था. प्लानिंग के डॉक्यूमेंट में एक एक्सेल शीट के लाइन आइटम में लिखा है बिल्डिंग लिस्ट स्कूल. बिल्डिंग का जो ग्रांट था वो भारत सरकार के अकाउंट में बैठा हुआ था. उसको स्कूल तक पहुंचने में थोड़ा टाइम लग रहा था, 2-3 साल लग गए. वो बात छोड़िए, चलिए स्कूल मिल गया. बच्चे थे, टीचर थी, दोनों साथ साथ में थे, तो लगा कि चलो स्कूल चल रहा है. आखिरकार बिल्डिंग की ज़रूरत नहीं होती स्कूल के लिए, बच्चे चाहिए, टीचर चाहिए और पढ़ाई लिखाई का काम होना चाहिए. सब हो रहा था. उस बिल्डिंग के बिना वाला स्कूल, बिल्डिंग लिस्ट स्कूल को अपने 15,000 रुपये जो स्कूल मेंटेनेंस ग्रांट में उनके पास पहुंचते थे, वो कह रहे थे कि हम चाहते थे कि उन पैसों से हम अपने बच्चों के लिए कुछ नए नए किताब खरीद लें. बिल्डिंग तो था नहीं, तो और क्या कर सकते थे. ये पैसा वैसे ताट पट्टी और छत की मरम्मत वगैरह के लिए आता था. बिल्डिंग नहीं था, तो क्यों ना इन पैसों को हम बच्चों की पढ़ाई लिखाई में जाके इन्वेस्ट करें. मगर ऊपर से आदेश आया कि फायर सेफ्टी एक्सटिंग्विशर सारे स्कूलों को खरीदना है, और अगर नहीं खरीदा तो उसका यूसी नहीं मिलेगा सरकार को, तो अगले साल का पैसा नहीं निकलेगा. और अगर आपने यूसी नहीं दिया तो डीएम भी सवाल करेगा कि जो आदेश ऊपर से आया था उसको आपने पूरा फॉलो क्यों नहीं किया, सीधा आपको डांट पिटेगी. तो जिस स्कूल के पास बिल्डिंग नहीं था, उसने उन छोटे से पैसों को अपने बच्चों में के विकास के लिए नहीं खर्च किया. एक फायर एक्सटिंग्विशर का वाउचर के लिए पता नहीं किसको कहाँ से उल्टी तरीके से वाउचर निकाल के एक यूसी निकलवाने के लिए खर्च किया. दिस इज़ व्हाट हैपन्स व्हेन वी सेंट्रलाइज. डीएम को क्या पता है कि उस स्कूल की क्या ज़रूरत है, वो तो अपने ऑफिस में बैठा हुआ है. पंचायत को पता था, पंचायत ने ही हमें उस स्कूल को दिखाया था, मगर पंचायत के पास पैसा नहीं था, बिकॉज दैट टू वाज सेंट्रलाइज्ड. विकास तभी होता है जब पैसा लोगों की ज़रूरतों के हिसाब से खर्च होता है, और उस ज़रूरत को तय करने वाला ना आप हैं ना हम. उस गांव के रहने वाले को सबसे बेस्ट पता है, ना आपको ना हमें. So if we want strong economic development, we need to empower all levels of government to spend to the needs of people, and only then can citizens ask for accountability of governments. Because पंचायत cannot say कि भारत सरकार कि राज्य सरकार से पैसा नहीं आया, और राज्य सरकार cannot say कि भारत सरकार से पैसा नहीं आया, और भारत सरकार इलेक्शन के टाइम पे ये नहीं कह सकता कि हमने तो पैसा दिया मगर राज्य सरकार ने इम्प्लीमेंट नहीं किया क्योंकि वो ऑपोजिशन की पार्टी की थी. ये जो चक्कर, जिस चक्कर में हम लोग घूमते हैं अपने इलेक्शंस में, उसे तोड़ना भी बहुत ज़रूरी है, और उसी से हमारी डेमोक्रेसी में ज़्यादा ताकत आएगी. सो एन अपील टू थिंक अबाउट फेडरलिज्म as central to our national identity, our many identities, which is the heart of the unique and successful experiment of democracy that is India, as crucial to our economic development, because every time we try to say that somebody sitting far away knows best how to spend for somebody sitting somewhere else, money gets spent on the wrong things and for the wrong things. And when we remove ideas of consensus, sites and institutions of consensus, of deliberation, of dialogue, we fail to pursue paths of development that make most sense for those who elect us, for those in whose name we serve. So federalism matters hugely for development, for economic development, and most importantly, it is the glue of our democracy. Thank you.